almost in a fist fight with the Hebrew school director because she was programming us to sing the Israeli national anthem. And my dad felt some type of way about this because he was like, no other religion has a homeland. Like, you can't conflate religion and political, like, occupation. And so, like, from the time that I was probably like 10, we had like very critical conversations about separating these two things. And the story is much funnier when you know that, like, at the time my dad was disabled and he had a walker. So it's just like a very funny visual to me that like my dad is like trying to get in a fight with this little old lady. Um, but yeah.
That's an incredibly rad memory to have. It's like your entry point into anti-Zionism is yeah, thrown down. Thank you for that, Sydney. Anybody else?
I'm also happy to go. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Oh, I also neglected to mention in my intro that I also interned with Stop OU's buying, I think like this time a year ago. So yeah, really great to be back and see some familiar faces. Yeah, so my intro into Palestine, um, I, like Sydney, I'm also Jewish, and my family's never had a sort of personal connection to Israel. But I think for my parents, especially my mom, who grew up as a child of Holocaust survivors, like Israel and Zionism for her always sort of represented this kind of hypothetical place of safety and refuge. And so growing up, that was my sort of understanding of what Israel represented. And in 2014, when I was, I think, like 16 or 15 or 16, um, during two sort of things were happening that summer. Israel's assault on Gaza, what the Israeli occupation forces called Operation Protective Edge, and also the Ferguson uprisings. And I think like that moment, more than anything else at the time, really stuck out to me as a place of, or as kind of as a site of drawing connections between anti-Blackness and policing and Zionism, and sort of being able to make sense of that analytically, I think was like an entry point to me to sort of unlearn the propaganda that I also encountered in Hebrew school and also to some degree through my family. And from then I started getting more involved with housing organizing and when I got to college too. And yeah, so that was sort of it for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Taylor, and thank you for uplifting that intersectionality. That's something we talked about last week, how, there's a great deal of anti-Blackness within the so-called state of Israel, and that's not something that's mentioned. I think last week we were specifically talking about how Ethiopian Jews had to undergo forced sterilization, not consensual forced sterilization. And so, yeah, I appreciate you uplifting that. And I'm glad that you named that you were with the coalition. I was going to take that personally had you not. Um, first 30 minutes. Anyone else?
I can go, but I mean, it's not some like big grand story. I just learned about it in high school. It's like this is wrong. And I think as I kind of grew up, um, I made the connections that Palestine is connected to so many other um global struggles. The main thing I do here at Stanford is labor organizing. And it's been really great to see all the unions on campus take a stand with Palestinians. Um, what was the other part of the question?
Yeah, kind of
How
how
did
did
I that yeah, like it's just like not a big story, but everyone else is more interesting. But
no, I think that was plenty interesting. Thank you for
okay, thanks.
that. It's really cool to see folks' different entry points. Um, and so, I'm sorry, before I continue, does anyone else want to share? I know some folks haven't. We can extend this invitation to our non-SJP guests too, or maybe former SJP guests.
Hi, also not necessarily a huge story. I am from Gulat or Qatar, Doha. So One of my best friends is from Syria, who, she recently got married, obviously not at home. And, like a lot of people, my friends are Palestinian and just like my community. So it doesn't feel like a big story either. While I was an undergrad, I was a part of the Society of Arab Students, and we often organized with the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, a lot of whom, the current kind of members, have been doxxed recently. So have been in kind of SJP in the past, but not as plugged in as a grad student.
Thank you so much for that. Anyone else? Okay. Well, cool. And if folks have any other questions they want to hear from our guest today, please drop it in the chat. And so obviously, there's always kind of been Zionist backlash to advocating for Palestine, even before this recent escalation post October 7th. I'm wondering, Taylor, Sophia, or Matthew, any one of you, could you talk us through what the norm for backlash was? Maybe a little introduction to websites like Canary Mission that I think everyone knows about at this point, but maybe if they don't, talk a little bit about what normal Zionist backlash was in the past, and then kind of what you're facing right now.
Yeah, there's I think I'll just do Canary Mission in the Anti-Defamation League, which I guess the Anti-Defamation League goes into today too. But there's Canary Mission, which is a nonprofit with the dedication to eliminate, quote unquote, spreading the hatred of Israel, which is a phrase that is in many of the Canary Mission profiles. But the deal with Canary Mission is, obviously with the canary metaphor, is to create public profiles for mostly anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian activists, which they group in with neo-Nazis and white supremacists to have the false narrative that anti-Semitism, within anti-Semitism includes anti-Israel sentiment. Within a Canary Mission profile, which I have many of the privilege of knowing many people with Canary Mission profiles, is usually a semi-detailed description of a person's activities related to Palestine, whether or not you maybe signed a statement or maybe attended a conference, as well as a series of paragraphs explaining why that organization is tied to the spreading of hatred of Israel or strange accusations of connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. Also, the profiles really much depend. If you're a woman, for example, or if you're a minority, there'll be some weird kind of writing in there related to that. But essentially, it's a public wanted poster for anyone who wants to get involved in Palestinian solidarity. So that was sort of the old repression. And then there's the ADL, which is a Jewish civil rights organization, ostensibly, that has extremely pro-Israel views and has in the past been very, very attentive to defending Israel and defending these sort of pro-Zionist networks. Back in the 90s, for example, what was it? Even the ADL worked with federal law enforcement to surveil not only pro-Palestine activists, but anti-apartheid activists. They've lobbied the government for anti-Palestinian legislation around BDS, et cetera, et cetera. So those are sort of the two main forms of repression before October 7th.
Okay. Maybe if I could give some context to just how deep and long lasting this surveillance has been. There's a former Stanford student who is Palestinian. And after they graduated, they got a job at one of those global NGOs, something Human Rights Watch adjacent. And they were going to be directed or promoted to like the issue area coordinator on Palestine. And then they figured out that they could not enter the country of Palestine. And when you're like working in these NGOs, like you have to be very neutral. So he knew that it wasn't anything that he had done in like the past 10 years that would have warranted being barred entry to Palestine. And it turns out that their justification was a picture of a poster that he had put up in our student union when he was a freshman at Stanford. And that followed him decades later to his job at a global NGO, and he was subsequently barred entry to Israel and Palestine. So if that gives you any idea to how deeply insidious this is, it's like it really follows you everywhere, and it's the most minute stuff that they will surveil and like collect and attach to your name and face, like as you go through the world. So
Thank you for that, Sophie. Oh, please go ahead, Akil.
Yeah, this is Akil. I am not a former SJP student. I wish I was. I wish I had the, awareness and brilliance and courage that you all have here when you're in university right now. I just want to say explicitly that the purpose of Canary Mission is to try to make these students unemployable. Like, it's to intimidate and to basically threaten people with destitution, with poverty, and an inability to get into the careers that they're, going to college for. It's a really devastating tactic. And then besides just the material effect of it, like the point of accusing, especially Palestinians, of anti-Semitism for opposing Zionism, opposing their own elimination, is basically to paint them as being like demonic and less than human. And it's a way of trying to show them to be inherently violent, to be motivated by just aggression and irrational hatred. So it's really connected to the genocide itself, because it's about trying to color these people as deserving of being wiped out. So it's a really horrible thing. And I also think we should just name who the people who fund Canary Mission are. And I might be wrong. Is it Adam Milstein or is it somebody else? Who's maybe one of the SJP students who the Canary Mission funder is? Do any of you know?
is this a test or?
No, it's a genuine question, not rhetorical.
Oh, no, I don't. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I can look it up while you all are talking and try to post it in the chat.
Thank you for that, Akil. And yeah, I'm really blown away by, Sophia, your story about someone, having their employment affected, well, not maybe necessarily employment, but their mobility within their employment affected decades after the fact. This equating of folks with explicit white supremacists, like vocal, proud white supremacists, in the hopes of making them unemployable, like limited context. Anyone else want to add to some of that backlash?
I can add. I wasn't a member of SJP because, well, most recently I was in law school, and we tried to get a Law Students for Justice in Palestine, like a SJP chapter, but it was denied. I went to University of Miami, very Zionist campus. I guess like just to share the amount of fear that exists amongst the Zionists. I was a member of National Lawyers Guild. And, you introduce yourself when you're on the board. All these student orgs have little social medias. And in mine, I recommended near the end, like said a little bit about myself, and I recommended that people read Ghassan Kanafani. And Zionist students took that and reported me to the dean of students and tried to essentially like have like a notation on my bar when I file to the bar that, you know, I advocate for support and the reading of terrorism. And, you know, Ghassan Kanafani was a member of the PFLP, advocated for armed resistance, this and that. So like that was like a whole 2-year process for one sentence in a bio. That's how much they are still scared of that man. So like when I say like it's a cowardly tactic, it's because like the Zionists, like they don't have strategy. It's all a marketing campaign. Their military strategy is a marketing strategy. That's all they have. And that's why they're shaking in their boots right now. So again, one line in a bio, I had to deal with like 2 years of a headache and almost got like suspended from law school for like, hey, maybe y'all should read this guy. Like that's it. So just I say that to say like that is how pervasive it is, and that's how scared they are that they have to like point at these types of things to try and mess with people's livelihoods. But I graduated. I'm good. Fuck them. We made it.
That's right. Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah, you got me really fired up there, Jareen. So thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm so sorry you had to endure that, obviously. But yes, the lengths at which they'll go. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm wondering, clearly things have escalated right now. As we've seen from those headlines, a few campuses, a few schools have letters circulating from faculty and admin demonizing students, right, who are advocating for Palestinian liberation, supporting Palestinian resistance. Can y'all talk a little bit about what's going on in your respective campuses? And I think I'm going to pick on you first, Taylor, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a bit of a continuation of the last question, but something that was actually a bit more prevalent at Berkeley last year when we launched a BDS campaign asking student organizations to adopt a pledge not to invite Zionist speakers, which a number, I think around 16 student organizations adopted, and was a really huge victory in that respect. At the time of that, a number of Zionist organizations, including Accuracy in Media, which is this like allegedly nonpartisan investigative journalism organization, sent trucks to campus that we're also now seeing at universities across the country that I imagine you all have seen, listing students' names and saying that they're anti-Semites, putting their names next to images of Hitler, and like threatening to send these images to their employer, and exactly the kind of backlash and I think unemployability and demonization that Akil was talking about. And so I think a lot of what we've seen at Berkeley in many ways has just been a sort of continuation of the backlash that absolutely didn't start during our BDS campaign, but I think hit this sort of inflection point last year. So coming back to this year, SJP at the law school released a statement around like October 11th, condemning Israel's sort of continued genocide in Gaza. Almost immediately after which we got bombarded, both within and beyond our university. Our dean went to the press, released a statement, or released an op-ed saying that we were anti-Semite, just sort of rehashing that old playbook. A faculty member within our university too, like circulated this email to the entire faculty, again asking to like condemn us and or specifically to like condemn Hamas and like all this bullshit. And I think in many ways, a lot of the attacks that we've seen or that students have been feeling and experiencing from beyond campus have certainly been emboldened and enabled by the types of backlash and targeting that we've experienced from within the university. And I think I forgot where I was going with this. But yeah, so I think in many ways it feels definitely like a continuation of what we saw last year. And I think something that's challenging about organizing within a university setting is that universities love process, they love procedure, and they love bureaucracy. And I think there's a sort of promise of being able to like mediate conflicts within the university. You know, there's always a sort of like advisor or administrator that you can go to. And while we have our allies and people who are sort of individually sympathetic, I think just in sort of thinking about Berkeley, like probably all these campuses as organizations that, or as institutions that deeply profit off of Zionism and have deep material investments, I think those sorts of investments will to some degree like always override the will of like an individually sympathetic administrator. And so I think a lot of the tasks have just been sort of thinking about collectively building power, not just within our SJP, but with SJPs at law schools across the US, and I think like SJPs generally. So yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Taylor. Yeah, and I appreciate you tying it to the past in that way. Yeah, I want to direct the next question to you, Matthew. Kind of, and I know things are kind of happening in real time for you, but what's going on your campus?
Funny that you may ask. Wait, 1 second. I gotta mute my stuff again because it's blaring. Well, currently, as we speak, students of Oxy SJP and 10 other student organizations are currently occupying the central administrative building on our campus. Occidental is a school of about 2,000 students, and in the center of the campus is a building called the Arthur G. Coons Administrative Building. In that building includes the president's office, many of the offices that conduct with like the registrar, HR, career center. It's this whole like central complex if you were to come to Occidental, where like in the center of the campus on Alumni Avenue, you can see this glass building, this like panopticon structure in the middle of campus. And we're currently occupying that building for the school to respond to our demands, many of which are simply naming what's happening in Palestine, the genocide, condemn Israel, as well as divestment, but also particular demands like we don't have a Middle East studies major, even though we have ethnic studies majors for all other ethnicities and regions of the world, and specializations. Like a Muslim student life coordinator, the only student life coordinator for a religion we have is the Jewish life student coordinator, which is funded through a fellowship. However, the school can very easily find the same thing for Muslim students. Any support for Mesa students, which in the days precede or after October 7th, the school sent several emails supporting Jewish students, which is great, of course, but there was no official channels for Muslim, Mesa, or Palestinian students. Zero, absolutely zero. So those are our like less known demands, as well as defending our right to demonstrate. Currently in the building, there are about upwards of 150 people, which out of 2,000 people is obviously quite a bit. It's about 7% of our school. And our demonstrations, our marches around campus, which we've done about 3 or 4, our largest turnout brought out about 20% of the student population. So we've been very active. We have a lot of support from faculty. The faculty released a letter a week after the school's official response, which attracted, at this point, 60 signatures from mostly humanities professors who have been helping us organize the occupation. Many professors are sitting in with us in the building. And as of today, we have we have a meeting scheduled with the president tomorrow. For him either to acquiesce to our demands or we continue the sit-in. And during the sit-in, we have quite a bit of programming, such as teach-ins about Palestine and organized labor, a teach-in about dealing with reactionary Zionist talking points. We have a teach-in about organizing and care work. We have a teach-in from my favorite, Professor Reddy, She's originally from South Africa and was jailed under apartheid as a communist. She has a teaching about the parallels between apartheid in South Africa and apartheid in Israel. So it's been really great, especially to see this big ass coalition that includes clubs from like BSA to PUSO to like a women's leadership club. It's been really great to see. However, administration has been sending many emails alluding to expelling students who occupy the AGC. However, they would have to deal with expelling at times 200 people who have either went into the building or are actively in the building. So that's what's happening in Lincoln.
That's incredible. I want to upload Akil in the chat. Love that this is happening at Obama's alma mater. So yeah, well, I'm not sure he loves it. But yeah, Zofia, same question to you. What's going on? What are y'all facing right now?
So right now the big thing is there's a sit-in. It's in White Plaza. It's our free speech area. So students have been like camping out there for, I think we just passed the 3-week mark. So that's been difficult. Obviously there's a lot of people who come up to sit-in. A lot of like a lot of random adults who I've never seen biking up and like attempting to cause problems. What we were told is that everyone who's at the sit-in, they already have pictures of you. So they're coming close to like try to record you saying stuff. So that, I'm not gonna lie, that has not been fun to deal with. And like being out there, sleeping out there, especially at night, is a little bit spooky. A student was the victim of a racially motivated attack maybe like a week ago. It was a student, a Syrian refugee, actually wearing a shirt that said Damascus in Arabic. He was hit by a car, and the attacker said, "I hate you and your people," while driving off, and the student had to be hospitalized. So yeah, there's just a lot going on. And because I'm a transfer from community college, I didn't know, I guess being at Stanford, like progressivism at elite universities is like a big issue in like the culture war. And I've never felt like so much public scrutiny towards me as a student ever since coming here. And there's a lot of that same sentiment, like we need a list of names and faces, or like I would never send my student to Stanford, which is like, okay, like whatever. But the issues that we're fighting for, the first, which is, I think, yeah, the first is like mental health and community supports for MENA, Muslim, and Palestinian students. There's a Muslim community center that like cannot be political. And there's also Hillel, or the Center for Jewish Life. And if you don't know, like Hillel is like a gigantic organization. They have a lot of funding, and overall there's a lot of supports for Jewish students on campus and none for Muslim or Palestinian students. There's also a push for more Palestinian faculty, although I think that Palestinian faculty also has to come with support from the university. Edward Said, who's this very famous Palestinian academic, he wrote Orientalism. He was at Columbia. And basically he talked about how like his whole time there was like spent within reach of a panic button. Like he was getting death threats, and like obviously the institution profits immensely off of his academic contributions, but they didn't protect him then. And like obviously they banned SJP and JVP on campus, so they're not protecting Palestinian students now. And then the big one is divestment, which is like universities, especially big private universities, they have these very large endowments, which are just like these gigantic investment portfolios, which are often invested in like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, like all the standard military industrial complex companies, as well as like other companies who profit from the continued oppression of Palestinians. And yeah, so 3 weeks for the sit-in. It's kind of been harrowing. Like everyone talks about courage. Like honestly, I felt so anxious this whole time on campus. Like I feel like it really kind of hits you mentally. Like obviously I wouldn't change it for anything, but you know, like we're all students, we don't get paid. Like, and we all have other obligations. Like, so to see everyone putting so much time and effort to this is like really great. But like obviously a lot of us are feeling really drained. But we're on track to be the longest sit-in in the history of Stanford. The longest one was actually protesting against apartheid in South Africa. So yeah, sorry if that was very long.
It was not. It was perfect. Thank you so much for that, Zofia. And and thank you for naming how, this rhetoric, this demonizing of, student organizers is escalating to physical violence, right? It goes beyond unemployability. It goes beyond insults. It's a threat on lives. And of course, brown lives being the most vulnerable of that. And so I appreciate you uplifting that. And so, I think you all have kind of named varying dynamics of pressure and hostility throughout, from faculty and whatnot. We know that UCLA just released a letter by nearly 300 faculty to condemn Hamas terror attacks and anti-Israel rallies. And so I'll drop that in the chat. It's a real piece of work. Our favorite. Oh, is that the letter? Michelle, or is that something else you just dropped?
Yeah, it has all the list of faculty names on it too.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for dropping that. David Eisenman, who's a professor we talk a lot about in relation to the CV framework, is listed in there. And the CV framework for folks who don't know, CV stands for Countering Violent Extremism, and it's a DHS framework to effectively a proxy for behavioral surveillance, racist behavioral surveillance, that's bolstered and uplifted by Zionists in a lot of ways. So I say that to say, we see faculty coming after students too. Taylor, I think the dean of your law school has famously come out and called the campus incredibly anti-Semitic. I believe there's a UC Berkeley law professor who wrote a piece called "Don't Hire My Anti-Semitic Students." I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what the dynamics are, beyond even just your organizing groups. Like, are you feeling support from other students, from faculty? What's the split look like? Are these pressures and anti-Zionist, or I'm sorry, and Zionist backlash coming from outside the campus, and what's the campus dynamics look like right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in part because of our BDF campaign last year, at least among students who were here for that, which means like second-year law students and third-year law students, I think a product of that was a really strong multiracial coalition of people who, like, some of whom were maybe introduced to the Palestinian struggle or to Zionism for the first time, and others who may have been involved, like while I was here in undergrad or in other ways. And so I think the kind of political education and solidarity that formed during that has been a really nice form of student support to kind of lean back on. I think at the same time, as one of my professors put it, Palestine very much feels unsayable. on campus. I think in part because, you know, the dean of our law school is continually going to the press, calling students anti-Semites. In the latest article, he specifically named Students for Justice in Palestine. I think professors and particularly professors of color are feeling a lot of pressure and even concerns about surveillance and ending up on online blacklists, which I think kind of translates to this culture where, like, in our classrooms, maybe like I think I had one professor mention like events in the Middle East, and with some rare and important exceptions, I think that's been really hard. And I also think, and I think this is something I've seen in Berkeley and also have heard friends and other campuses talk about too. I think in many ways, the past few weeks has sort of like opened people's eyes to who they feel like they can trust, and that's something that I think I and definitely a lot of us have felt on our campus, and it's hard. I think even just in terms of like people are losing friendships or realizing maybe those friendships were built on like vastly different political commitments than they originally understood. And so I guess maybe the last thing I'll say too is that it's like hard and not fun for like all the reasons that people are saying to be going to school on a campus where you feel the threat of like potentially being doxxed by your classmates, which is something like a number of my friends have expressed worries about, even like concerns about what people are saying in group chats being leaked and sent to Canary Mission and things like that. So I think on one hand, that's been really hard. And I think at the same time, I feel like grateful and lucky that we kind of built and are continuing to build the community that we did last year.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Taylor. And at the coalition, we've named this effort by groups like the ADL, by Zionists in large, to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And we're seeing this happen in bigger and bigger ways as of late. I just dropped a link to an Intercept article about how the ADL is now mapping JVP actions for ceasefires, anti-Semitic events. And that's something we see, beyond college campuses, right? That's something that's been passed as a motion here in the city of Los Angeles as the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And obviously we've talked in the past few weeks a lot about how in the Biden-Harris administration's framework for countering anti-Semitism, they also include language that affirms a commitment to the state of Israel in discussing anti-Semitism, right? And so in service of that conflation, and I definitely don't want to equate the two, but we see that play out in the city here more locally. We've seen kind of support for Israel come out right away post October 7th within LAUSD communications. And so as you're describing this type of culture of snitching and reporting and doxing, I'm reminded of the Lazar app here in LAUSD that we're fighting against, and how there is an active effort to create a culture of deputization and snitching among peers and people outside the community for suspicious behaviors or criminal behaviors. And in this instance, an example of that would be anti-Semitism. I wanted to open it up for any questions or comments folks had before we moved on, or Matthew, Zofia, if you wanted to add anything to what Taylor had said. Okay, cool.
Can I make-
Oh,
Sorry, can I make a quick comment about that conflation? Sorry, 1 second. Let me make sure I can turn on my camera. So I feel like I just wanted to put out there that I've been seeing this really interesting contradictory narrative coming from Zionists about that conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, in that they mark I mean, with their kind of hyperbole and their exaggerations and their outright lies, when according to them, anti-Zionists um are conflating Jews as Jews with the state of Israel, and sometimes with like specifically warped stories about SJPs. But then they also regularly and in an industrial scale and with institutional backing conflate Jews with Israel. And it's this kind of dynamic where they want Jews to be conflated with Israel for everything good, and then want to use moments where people mistakenly identify Jews with Israel as as a further justification for Zionism in the exact same way, you know. And I feel like one thing that we have to name when we talk about that conflation, and I think SJP is so good at this, and JVP is good at this too, and I feel like, you know, the Palestinian solidarity world is good at this, but you know, sometimes people don't get this, is that that conflation of Jews with Israel is first and foremost a tool to exterminate Palestinians. Like, Palestinians are the intended victims of that conflation. And Jews are also the victims of that conflation. But the way I feel about it is that they are what, for Zionists, they are an acceptable secondary target. Like they're okay with Jews being harmed. In fact, they're more than happy about it. Jews being harmed by people mistakenly conflating them with Israel, because then that actually is further justification in their end for, they call it anti-Semitism, and then they say, see, because of this anti-Semitism, we need Zionism. But we have to name that that conflation is, the root cause of that is coming from Zionism, and specifically the fact that Israel, you know, has set itself up structurally as, you know, a state that privileges what it considers to be Jews, which historically has not even been all Jews. But yeah, I just wanted to name that.
I can just add on to that and say that there are, like, I have Jewish friends who have expressed their personal hurt with Zionism being equated to Judaism, as they feel like they can't go into organizing spaces without immediately being tied to Zionism, which is like personally like hurtful to them. And a lot of the places for Jewish students on campus are so intertwined with Zionism. It is hard for anti-Zionist Jewish people to have safe spaces on campus. Like, I know it was expressed to me, like, I just wish that we had a place to like celebrate, like, for example, the high holidays without like having to walk into and be associated with like a Zionist space. So the conflation of Zionism with Judaism like unequivocally hurts Jewish people. And it is hard for Jewish people who are in support of Palestine to like, it has like deliberately cut them off from their community as well, which is not good.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for uplifting some not so obvious, like violent facets of Zionism. Go ahead, Hamid.
Yeah, I don't want to just get ahead of ourselves, but I wanted to ask: are we going to be discussing what's our response, or what's our organizing plan about it? Or, because I have a couple thoughts, but I don't want to just get ahead of ourselves.
There's a fight back section, but if you're dying to get it out, man, please do.
No. I just I mean, I think it's also crucial that what's happening on campuses, how does that translate into the much broader state violence and assault and policies? So I think that's where a couple things come in. I mean, first of all, I mean, obviously, what's happening right now is a continuation of what's been going on, particularly about Palestine and Palestinian students. I mean, PFLP and the LA 8 case going back almost the Palestinian Front for Liberation, Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine. That was, members of that, Michel Shahade and some other people going back in the 1980s. How that became a huge case, but I think while that case was critical, it was also that how it then inserted a lot of restrictions in immigration policy, particularly when it comes to student visas and all of that. So that's one. But I think in the also when we look at it with the broader, just policy making and state violence. For me, it's always going back to the Palestinian identity that has really driven both a part of in the cultural context and the political context and foreign policy, and how it impacts local lawmaking as well. So that has been the face of the supposedly the terrorists, the violent one, the less than human, the Hollywoodization of all of that, how that has worked over the last few decades as well. So Palestine and the Palestinian, just imagery is very central on so many different levels. So I was thinking of, because campus police, I mean, this goes back to what led to the creation of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, is the suspicious activity reporting program, and campus police was one of the key parts and partners of that. So down the line, whether folks want to file public records to NCRIC, which is Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, and out here, JRIC, how information is going, and even back to, because we did a series of those back about 10 years ago at UCLA and some of the campuses as well. And at that time, the program was just starting, but I think it may not be a bad idea to file public records over there as well. So yeah, just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hamid. Go ahead, Akil.
I just wanted to ask like a kind of logistical question about that, because these fusion centers are federal buildings, which means that they'd be subject to FOIA. And that means, and I just know vaguely that FOIAs are a real pain in the ass in a lot of ways, in the sense that they take forever unless you have so I'm just wondering, would you all suggest potentially, if we're brainstorming strategy, like partnering with some kind of larger, more powerful legal entity that can kind of give pressure to the federal government to comply, or do you think we should think about state entities rather than fusion centers? I mean, I'm down with going out to the fusion centers. I'm just curious how that looks logistically.
So the public records will be filed to the educational institutions, because if they might be like Stanford is a private institution, but if they are working in partnership with a state entity, UCLA would be a pretty straight shot, and UC Berkeley and some of these public institutions. But the private institutions would be in partnership with the Joint Regional Intelligence Center, and where they go, and how the PDs then investigate and vet them for nexus to terrorism. That's when they would just send to the fusion centers. So there's ways to craft out local public records into the California Public Records Act, but we can clarify that more as to what that process would be.
Yeah, thank you for that, Hamid, and thank you for that clarifying question, Akil. And yeah, even PRAs, I think, regarding some of the public safety, they're often called public safety departments, but police departments on these campuses. What are they saying? What are they sharing? We know from our own public records from the LAPD on shadow teams in 2020. Shadow teams, for folks who don't know, are undercover and uniformed LAPD units that monitor protests and surveil protests, infiltrate protests. We know that they were collaborating with some college campus police and communicating specifically about students, identifying students. And so maybe that's something we can look into as well. And even hearing about maybe directing some pressure on academics who are, actively trying to demonize some students. But we'd love to create a space to kind of hear about how we can support that work led by students on campuses. Any other questions for folks around about this? Anything folks want to add?
Just a stray thought that I think submitting, I don't have an exact idea about what the content of a PRA would be, but when I to uplift that it is like such a valuable source of support, because I think, or as I've seen it personally, a lot of people are not like, don't necessarily want their name on a PRA request that could then be traced back for like doxing or for employment reasons. So yeah, that could be.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, that's something we're more than happy to do. Right. I've got a question that kind of precedes this most recent escalation in Zionist backlash, and it's something y'all have made mention to a couple times during the course of this conversation, and it's the divestment resolutions, divestment campaigns, which we know SJP has been a part of and has done for a while. And I know we've heard that the UC system has maybe approved a divestment resolution in some capacity. But we know that these resolutions get passed. Sometimes they get repealed due to Zionist backlash. So I'm wondering if you could, Matthew, Sophia, and Taylor, talk a little bit about maybe the history of that campaign, what it aims to do, and where your schools are at with that. Matthew, we haven't heard from you in a while. If you're available.
Can you repeat the question? I was just looking at an email we got from a attorney at the ACLU.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry about that, Matthew. And no need to answer if it's if now isn't the best time. I was just asking about if your campus has any history on working on divestment campaigns or divestment resolutions at your school, and where that's at, if it is.
Yeah, I can tell you a bit about that. So in 2021 was the big year for SJP before this year, because that was the year where we as SJP successfully lobbied for our student government, which is called ASOC. And I do not know what the acronym stands for, but it's called ASOC. To divest. However, we failed. We didn't fail. The Board of Trustees failed to divest from apartheid in 2021. So going back into the 80s, when the anti-apartheid struggle was pretty alive and well on Occidental's campus, because it was unusually one of the few multiracial liberal arts campuses in California. When that was going down in the 80s, the school refused to divest from apartheid South Africa 3 times, and the last vote was only decided by a margin of 1. So this is the school we're dealing with. However, in the 2021 case, there was a little bit more optimism this time around, because the school divested from arms manufacturing and gun distribution after Sandy Hook. So there's a little bit more optimism. However, divestment is out of very specific companies. It was out of companies like 3M, HP, Boeing, these companies that are directly tied to the occupation. So it's just about 20 companies were on our divestment agenda, and the divestment resolution didn't pass. Same year, everyone in Occidental SJP with any association gets doxed by the Canary Mission. So the doxing at our school was a direct product of our divestment campaign and our great deal of activity by someone in the same student government that we were able to successfully pass divestment for. So that's our history. I guess history is now with divestment, since we're lobbying for divestment at the moment. However, the outcome has not been decided, obviously.
Yeah, thank you for that history, Matthew, and thank you for drawing the connections to the campaign to divest from apartheid South Africa. Taylor, Zofia.
I can go. Yeah, I guess in 2021 there was also a resolution for divestment that passed our graduate student council and our undergraduate senate, but it did not pass the faculty senate. But I guess so students are trying again, and there is a rich history of like divestment at Stanford, at like student pushes towards divestment. Students push for divestment from apartheid South Africa in like the 80s and 90s, and then they successfully pushed for divestment against when there was the genocide in Sudan in 2015. So hopefully we could push for a third time. I will say though that it's just hard at a big private university. Like Stanford is in the Silicon Valley, and like there is a lot of like war profiteering here. Like people like Peter Thiel like having so much like investment and hold over the university. And obviously like Silicon Valley is so deeply entrenched in like the making and profiteering off of war. And it is kind of hard to be a student here in the context of all of that. The responses to the sit-in have not been great from administration, and there was some like threatening of like arrests happening before the student was attacked. After that, they kind of backed off, which obviously like it sucks that something so unfortunate had to happen for that to occur. But it's great to see so many students showing out for the sit-in and for protests and for stuff like that. It's great to have a legacy of organizers at Stanford who are able to accomplish stuff so big. Yeah, so that's where things are at.
Thank you, Zofia. Taylor, did you want to hop in there? Or?
Oh yeah. I don't think I have a ton to add, honestly. My understanding, UC Berkeley's Student Senate passed a divestment bill back in 2012, 2013. That also passed the like student Senate equivalent. And in 2021, there were also renewed calls for like the administration to kind of take divestment more seriously or for implementation. And I just looked it up. Only one law school professor signed it, which does not surprise me. And so, yeah, I definitely resonated with what Sophia and Matthew were saying. And I think, yeah, I also feel like to some degree, law school has like kind of narrowed my horizons for at least what is sort of possible on the divestment front from like this segment of the institution. But yeah, I don't know. I have hope, and I also, an aside, I think like working with like undergrad organizers at Berkeley's like SJP undergrad equivalent has been, I think, one of the most like awe-inspiring and like fun moments for me just of being in LSJP. So also like so great to be on this call with you all. And I feel like I learned so much from the undergrads you work with both at in like Repression Palestine, the Berkeley SJP, and our Jewish Voice for Peace chapter too.
That's awesome. And yeah, I just want to say really quickly, Matthew, even when you brought up how students were doxxed during that campaign, it made me think of what Jubin had said at the very top, where there is no kind of strategy to Zionist backlash or Zionist tactics, and how that doxing was in response to some really effective strategy and organizing by students. So I just wanted to make that connection and uplift what Jubin said earlier. Akil, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, do any of you in SJPs know if any school has like actually divested its endowment as a result of the resolutions passed by the student body and faculty? Or I know because there have been a lot of divestment wins over the years. I've seen them in social media. I'm just curious, like, if the administration has ever followed through. And then also for historical context, I'm curious if material divestment of the endowments happened in the anti-apartheid divestment campaigns. I know the context was different because back then the boycott was UN sanctioned. Like the UN was actually called, it was an official global boycott. Whereas here we can see the very ambivalent attitude of the UN that refuses to even name Israel as the aggressor. But I'm just curious, like, how much has the student activism back then and now translated into boycott? And then the second part of that question is like, if you all could just tell us some of the companies that you all are, just so people know, which companies are people trying to divest from and why.
Well, we can drop the link for BDS in the chat. So it's a very targeted boycott. I think it's 5 companies: HP, Puma, Ahava, Israeli Fruits and Vegetables, SodaStream, and maybe like I think a few others. So the BDS movement, because I'm sure you all have seen the boycott list going around, and obviously there's like a lot of targets that people are trying to organize boycotts around. And I think we should all be boycotting where we can. But the purpose of the BDS movement was to create a short list of targeted companies that people should boycott for the purpose of like a very pared down focus list is easy to build power around, rather than like a list of like maybe like 100 corporations. With that being said, I think a lot of what is happening around boycotts of like Starbucks or McDonald's or Disney or whatever, like I think that's all great. But the BDS movement asks for like it's like a short list. And the companies are not like, I think like HP is on there. They helped build like basically the digital border for Palestinians, which is like collects biometric data to further entrench the surveillance of Palestinians and restrict their movement. I'm sure other people can talk about other ones. I'm not like an expert on BDS. I think the best thing would be to go look at their website.
Zofia, don't the SJP divestment resolutions also include U.S. Weapons manufacturers too, though? Like, because those are not necessarily things we can boycott. Because I'm not about to go buy a plane, but I feel like the endowments might be invested in those.
Oh yeah, they definitely are. Definitely like there's like what we can do as consumers is boycott, and like what these larger institutions can do is divest. I think there's like a list going around with like specific like companies and institutions that are being advocated for divestment away from. I think it's just like, not that I'm like don't think it's feasible. I think everything is possible. It's just like hard, I think, with Stanford. Because the issue with like divestment is like they're losing money. and like this institution does not play about their money, like, and neither does any like gigantic educational institution. Like their businesses first and places of education like fifth. So I think grappling with that has been hard. Even with, I think, South Africa, Stanford didn't divest specifically, but they pressured, I think, Motorola to stop like investing or providing technology for South African military or police. So that was good, but it wasn't obviously what activists on campus were looking for, which was a complete divestment from South African industries. But you win where you can, I guess. It's a very long and frustrating fight.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Zofia. And even just kind of thinking and uplifting about the range of targets. In addition to the companies you listed, I know within the UC system that divestment campaign was targeted toward BlackRock, right? Which, so yeah, just so many targets there. Charles, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So the topic of like arms manufacturers and how to effectively target them was raised as well. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. One, is yesterday there was a highly successful direct action that shut down production at Raytheon and El Segundo for about 7 hours. Hamid, Shakir, and Matias were all there, and possibly some others on this call as well. And yeah, that was the choice of target there was partly informed by the fact that we want to do something in resonance with the broader campaign to shut down Elbit, which has been launched by Pal Action US, sort of inspired by their progenitor org Pal Action in the UK. Elbit, of course, being an actual Israeli weapons firm that has facilities all over both countries, but unfortunately none within striking range here in LA. So with that said, Pal Action has also expanded their call to action recently to include one of the main investors in Elbit, which is Bank of New York Mellon. So that call to action has now expanded. And the other point I wanted to raise was sort of in regards to this point that was raised earlier, right, about the distinctions between the South African example and the Israeli example, in terms of anti-apartheid campaigns. And I think it's important to be, to emphasize, where those differences do lie. As pointed out earlier, like South African apartheid, drew official condemnation from the UN, right? There was a much larger sort of coalition of states, especially in the global South, that mobilized essentially to implement essentially a diplomatic equivalent of BDS, right? In all the forums, all the different organizations that they're in. And that of course is one major distinction, right? That the liberation struggle in South Africa was plugged into a very active sort of third world liberation movement that had a presence across the global South, and it was sort of at the peak of its strength. And another, I think, is that as Max Eil has pointed out in a lot of his writings, and Palestinian resistance orgs as well, right? That like the situation in occupied Palestine actually goes beyond apartheid per se, in that it is, a full-blown settler colonial project. And for that reason, sort of the linchpin of the resistance to it on the ground in Palestine is in fact the armed resistance. And there's been a concerted campaign since Oslo, right? So for 3 decades at least, if not longer, to like literally not just delegitimize but criminalize any form of rhetorical or material solidarity with the armed resistance, right? And alongside that, build up, this kind of NGOization, this sort of parallel, so-called Palestinian civil society, which is counterposed to the armed resistance, right? By the forces of imperialism, by the collaborationist forces in the Palestinian Authority, and what this has done effectively, as we've seen now, right, is your sort of like precondition for speaking on this issue at all, even as like a Palestinian, is that you have to condemn Hamas, right? You have to run through this litany of like essentially accepting the enemy's rhetorical terms, and this has its effect as well, I think, on like the kind of the disjuncture that exists, right, between a lot of these sort of broader based divestment campaigns and the armed resistance. And of course, this is what like this has extended over into criminalizing BDS itself, right? Like they are trying to draw that equivalence even as they created the distinction in the first place to divide the movement. But I think it's very useful to be attentive to all those dynamics and to refuse any kind of rhetorical concession that condemns the armed resistance, or that treats it as a minoritarian tendency or something that is like separate, right, from like a broader based call from like an illusory sort of like purely nonviolent segment of like Palestinian civil society, but really to understand that it is part of this larger resistance project that aims not just to end apartheid, but to end settler colonialism entirely in Palestine.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Charles. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead, Hamid.
Yeah, just building on Charles's point. I mean, I also wonder, because comparing it to South Africa and Palestine, I mean, there's two very clear distinctions as well. That one was built on the anti-apartheid movement and how it succeeded here. Around South Africa was because it really kind of just challenged white guilt to the core. And the way the history of that going back a few hundred years, and the history of enslavement in the United States as well. So within that broader cultural context and in that historic context, that really just so there was a much larger, whether the government in the United States and Western Europe were different, but there was a larger amount of white guilt that kind of played out as well in the success of that boycott movement. I mean, here is the narrative of victimhood, and the narrative of victimhood has really solidified it and deeply entrenched itself so much that that, I mean, obviously, like just when you even use the words genocide and Holocaust and extermination. I mean, historically, just looking at the Native Americans, the people of African descent, and various other communities that have been targeted, it's a so I'm trying to just think out loud, and of course, like just the people at the BDS movement and many others have thought it out very, very deeply as well, that what additional layers of counter narratives need to be built, or how are they being laid out, just because the marketing agenda and the propaganda behind that victimhood runs very deep. And of course, historically speaking, there's much to be said about it, and about the Holocaust in Germany and the history of pogroms in Europe as well against Jewish people. But but now, and I'm just I was looking at this one site, about that whether and this is a site of the Israeli, where just how do we get maybe just to maybe approach it a little differently, is that this is the database of Israeli military and security exports to almost 130 countries. And so each one of them is like and when you look at their very close cooperation with settler colonial countries and various other, it runs very deep. I mean, it runs very deep now with the Abraham Accord and UAE and Bahrain and various other countries that are very much, because 25% of Israel's military export is to these countries too. So I'm just kind of, just again, as a matter of since we're having this conversation, how do we, just as organizers and people who are engaged in this, in kind of building and collective learning and building narratives, what can we do to build on what is there, and have and add additional layers to what the narrative of boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is. And I'm not just saying like it just has to be that, like each one of us in our own way, how are we sort of building this narrative, and how people independently are coming together as well around that. So yeah. I think Jubail has their hand up.
Yeah, I think one of I guess the narratives that's I'm trying to ground myself in is the defeats of the Zionist military, right? Like their incapability to succeed, and highlighting the successes of the armed resistance since October 7th, because this narrative of victimhood and the amount of violence and civilian death that we're seeing, that is overpowering all of that. That is overpowering all of the success, the military success, and that is why at least from what I see, why the killing of innocent civilians has been so, rampant more than ever before, because there have been no military successes from the Zionist entity. So that's a narrative that I'm really trying to tap into, to understand what makes this different than 2014, than 2021, and what it means, especially, I'm Iranian, right? So I was introduced to, I guess, Palestinian advocacy and anti-imperialism, anti-Zionism through the lens of like, okay, the US and Israel are in Iraq, Iran's next, and then Syria. So I guess that's the narrative that I'm trying to ground myself in, is like there's a reason why this is different than anything I've seen in my life, and it's because settler colonialism is dying. This is Zionism's like last ditch effort, and they're going to take out as many people as they can with them. And I hope that's not the case, but I guess that's where I'm trying to approach this from, if that makes sense.
Jubin, I've been thinking some of the exact same thoughts, and just wondering, like wishing that Israel would just admit defeat right now, give up its guns, live in peace as like equals with Palestinians, or just leave, whatever they want to do, and then just avoid this entire regional apocalyptic war. But I have no idea what's going to happen. But anyway, I wanted to ask I wanted to kind of like brainstorm on this other topic, which is like, I know everybody has their own kind of like maybe definition of fascism, but that thing that's kind of like coming to me in this moment right now is that all of the pretense that government, that the people in power, represent its constituents and are kind of like democratically, functioning, it's being really shred to pieces right now. And I feel like what fascism could be, one possible subjective definition, is like liberalism without all the pretense, without all of the veils, that basically that this is an exceptional country, etc., all this stuff. And I'm just wondering that related to the case, specifically the SJPs, because I'm still kind of stuck on this, that like so many schools have created and passed divestment resolutions, but because the student bodies have no functional power at the schools may not have actually divested the money because they care first and foremost about that money. And it reminds me kind of on a smaller scale of exactly what's happening, with these mass demonstrations here in the US, and the fact that every municipality, despite how many public comments they might hear, is endorsing these unanimous, declarations in support of genocide. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, what does the fight back look like outside of these kind of prescribed channels that they're showing us right now they don't give a shit about? They don't give a shit about like they do give a shit about student body resolutions, but only because it changes narrative. They don't actually care in the sense that they're not listening to you and divesting the money. They don't give a shit about 50,000 people in downtown LA or 300,000 people in DC or 1 million people in London or 1.5 million people in Turkey or wherever, So I'm just curious, like, when people en masse start realizing that those kind of like liberal pretenses don't matter at all for their politics, it's like revealing they're revealing the teeth behind the smile, what do we do instead? And maybe that's not something we can talk about on a recorded webinar.
Yeah,
but I'm curious what SJPs are thinking of doing instead. And I think that, maybe Occidental is a really good example of what's going on, or the camping out in Stanford too.
Not this federal ass question.
Okay, let's make this a rhetorical question, okay? Because I forgot my badge today. No, I'm just joking.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. Good save, Sophia. But great question too, Akil. One we can hopefully explore in a safer setting. But I think that does kind of, as we're wrapping up on time here. I think that does kind of lead into another question, which is, obviously SJPs are under attack, is something we've established over the course of this meeting. What can we do as people outside of schools to support? How can we help? Whether that's amplifying messaging or donating. Yeah, I'd just love to hear what y'all are looking for. Oh, y'all are good.
I guess I can start, although yeah, I guess just like building solidarity and connections with groups in the surrounding community is important. I think it just, especially at Stanford, because it feels like such a bubble, but building that solidarity is really important, and like engaging in this advocacy as like a community effort is really important. I think the main thing is, I think students have been looking for like advice or resources from more established organizations, especially when it comes to things like legal aid or legal advice, and stuff like that. I don't know if like donations are like best funneled into like us as students, and like there are a lot of ways to get money at Stanford. Like, I think we're fine on that end. It's just like more like hard skill stuff that like as students, or even like the law students at Stanford, like as a law student, you can't technically be giving legal advice. So like if someone has a law degree and is qualified by the bar of the state of California to be giving legal advice, like I think that is great. But there are a lot of organizations like Pali Legal and stuff like that who have been really helpful.
Thank you for that, Sophia. Oh, Taylor, please.
Seconding everything Sophia said, and I also think like the safety numbers thing is so real, and just showing up. And yeah, I think like showing up as community members to actions that are happening on different campuses is really meaningful. And like I think also particularly for like white people and Jewish people to provide like safety relatively and cover for student groups, I think that'd be valuable. And yeah, I mean, I think the same old like amplification is so important. And I think also makes people feel like there's a sense of support and solidarity that they're certainly not, or that we're certainly not getting from our administrators or from our faculty. And maybe a last thing that I've been reflecting on is over the past few days is just continuing to figure out ways to take care of ourselves and each other. Particularly because we don't know how long this will all go on. And I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about what sustainability looks like, and whether that's even the right kind of frame, or whether we need to like think of new vocabulary, or I need to like open my eyes to the vocabulary that's out there that I don't know about, to think about like, yeah, finding ways to kind of like hold ourselves and each other and to keep showing up while like maintaining care for ourselves. And yeah, just thinking about how like I think over the past few weeks it felt like the kind of call to show up has been at the forefront of my mind, and trying to figure out a way to do that while making sense of what feels like a sort of I don't know, a crisis without an end date in sight, because there's never necessarily an end date in sight is the thing that I've been kind of grappling with too.
Yeah, Taylor, thank you so much for uplifting that. And I've heard that framed as harm reduction in the past. I've framed that as, ensuring longevity in the work. But yeah, those spaces are crucial and necessary to kind of continue on, because we know there's not any one win, right? The fight goes on. And we hope we can be supportive in creating and fostering those spaces. Matthew, I wanted to give it to you before I opened it up to any last questions.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
I'd be happy to repeat the question. It's we're asking how can folks outside of SJPs or even schools support y'all right now?
Give us money. There's that. Signal, well, for us, it's like a lot of it's on the social media front with other SJPs. Since we are shadow banned, this is really true. Since most SJP accounts are shadow banned, signal boosting helps get the word out, even on campus, just because the way social media works. Like the more other organizations will share posts, the more likely people on campus are likely to see it, and the more likely people are to be mobilized. There's of course material support in money. Our occupation requires food, water, blankets, etc. for people to live semi-comfortably. We don't want them to get too comfortable, otherwise what's the point of the occupation? To live semi-comfortably in the time that they're occupying. As for a donation link, no, currently the donation link is my personal Venmo, which is not great OPSEC. Which I can drop in the chat later. There's of course on campus There's of course like the great faculty support we've had. There's of course like community members and other representatives from organizations coming on by, helping with facilitating speakers or just events. Maybe South LAPD Sparring can come by one of these days if they want to do that. For example, little teach-in. Yeah, there's a variety of ways, and we're always open to suggestions. Maybe if like you want to throw a DM and give us an idea about what we should do, that is always helpful because there are always so many angles to conduct our activism, and there's so many in terms of programming intricacies to Palestine. So that's how I'll answer that question.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. And yeah, resources are always important. All right. Any other questions for our dear friends? We're so grateful that you joined us tonight, but I wanna let folks in if they've got some last second dying questions or like dying to get some questions out.
We need to bring you all back on the radio show sometime.
Yeah. Sophia Taylor, Matthew, of course, we'd be happy to have you back.
As long as it's at the new time. Last time it was way too early.
We're starting at 5 p.m. this Thursday.
Just for you.
Yeah. After my 3 to 5 p.m. nap.
I just wanted
3
to
to
say
5 p.m. nap is intense. That's intense.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you like don't wake up from it and you like wake up at 9 p.m. and it feels like it's the next day. That's the worst.
then do you just like sleep through the rest of the night too?
Okay, why are we joke? Okay.
I just wanted to say that you
I don't nap that often.
this is true. Yeah, we can do the rest of the call in Zophia's sleep schedule. No, I'm just kidding. You all are so badass. I just wanted to say that I'm sure everybody here is thinking it, and like I know it's not all just like fun and it's like traumatizing and scary, but just like amazing organizing, and I'm really impressed and like amazed.
Yes, so grateful for you all. So hopeful for the fight. Just seeing y'all's ferocity and commitment to this work. We're so pleased. We're so pleased to rock with you in the way that we have been. We hope to continue to do. Yeah. Any last minute announcements from folks? If you're in LA, I know not everyone is. We have our movie night this week in Skid Row, where we'll be showing the Battle of Algiers, 5 p.m. on Friday at Central Division. And we also have our town hall with the South Asian Network in their little Bangladesh office, which I can drop in a flyer for in the chat in just a second. Any other announcements?
Oh, we have our Warren Youth working meeting Thursday at the exact same time as the radio show. So we have to figure out a new time, but for this week we'll do it without Matios, unfortunately. So that's Thursday at 5 p.m. If anybody here doesn't have the Zoom and is interested in joining, especially people who have been interested in getting involved with the coalition, this is a great working group in the coalition that is devoted to fighting against surveillance of youth under these programs that label youth as national security threats. You can just email the coalition at it's in the chat, stoplapspying@gmail.com, and we can get you that Zoom link or the calendar invite. Or you could not come to that meeting and listen to Matios instead on the radio. Or we could just sit in the Zoom together while listening to him.
But we'll be on air listening to the working group meeting, so I can't wait. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate you. Hope we see folks on Thursday over Zoom and in person on Friday if you're local. But y'all have been great. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.